Everything becomes clear when one sees that the loathed rival is actually a mediator. Max Scheler himself is not far from the truth when he states in Resentiment that, quote, the fact of choosing a model for oneself, end of quote, is the result of a certain tendency common to all men to compare oneself with others. And he goes on to say, quote, all jealousy, all ambition, and even an ideal like the imitation of Christ is based on such comparisons, end of quote. But this intuition remains isolated. Only the great artists attribute to the mediator the position usurped by the object. Only they reverse the commonly accepted hierarchy of desire. In the Memoirs of a Tourist, Stendhal warns his readers against what he calls the modern emotions, the fruits of universal vanity, envy, jealousy, and impotent hatred. Stendhal's formula gathers together the three triangular emotions. It considers them apart from any particular object. It associates them with that imperative need to imitate by which, according to the novelist, the 19th century is completely possessed. For his part, Scheler asserts, following Nietzsche, who acknowledged a large debt to Stendhal, that the romantic state of mind is pervaded by resentment. Stendhal says precisely this, but he looks for the source of this spiritual poison in the passionate imitation of individuals who are fundamentally our equals and whom we endow with an arbitrary prestige. If the modern emotions flourish, it is not because envious natures and jealous temperaments have unfortunately and mysteriously increased in number, but because internal mediation triumphs in a universe where the differences between men are gradually erased. The great novelists reveal the imitative nature of desire. In our days, its nature is hard to perceive because the most fervent imitation is the most vigorously denied. Don Quixote proclaimed himself the disciple of Amadis, and the writers of his time proclaimed themselves the disciples of the ancients. The romantic Vanito does not want to be anyone's disciple. He convinces himself that he is thoroughly original. In the 19th century, spontaneity becomes a universal dogma, succeeding imitation. Stendhal warns us at every step that we must not be fooled by these individualisms professed with fanfare. Stendhal warns us at every step that we must not be fooled by these individualisms professed with fanfare, for they merely hide a new form of imitation. Romantic revulsion, hatred of society, nostalgia for the desert, just as gregariousness, usually conceal a morbid concern for the other. In order to camouflage the essential role which the other plays in his desires, Stendhal's Vanito frequently appeals to the cliches of the reigning ideology. Behind the devotion, the mawkish altruism, the hypocritical engagement of the grandes dames of 1830, Stendhal finds not the generous impulse of a being truly prepared to give itself, but rather the tormented recourse of vanity at bay. The centrifugal movement of an ego powerless to desire by itself. The novelist lets his characters act and speak, Then in the twinkling of an eye, he reveals to us the mediator. He reestablishes covertly the true hierarchy of desire while pretending to believe in the weak reasoning advanced by his character in support of the contrary hierarchy. Let me reread that. He reestablishes covertly the true hierarchy of desire while pretending to believe in the weak reasoning advanced by his character in support of the contrary hierarchy. This is one of the perpetual methods of Stendhal's irony. The romantic Vanito always wants to convince himself that his desire is written into the nature of things, or, which amounts to the same thing, that it is the emanation of a serene subjectivity, the creation ex nihilo of a quasi-divine ego. Desire is no longer rooted in the object, perhaps, but it is rooted in the subject. It is certainly not rooted in the other. The objective and subjective fallacies are one and the same, both originate in the image which we all have of our own desires. Subjectivisms and objectivisms, romanticisms and realisms, individualisms and scientisms, idealisms and positivisms appear to be in opposition but are secretly in agreement to conceal the presence of the mediator. All these dogmas are the aesthetic or philosophic translation of worldviews peculiar to internal mediation. They all depend directly or indirectly on the lie of spontaneous desire. They all defend the same illusion of autonomy to which modern man is passionately devoted. It is this same illusion which the great novel does not succeed in shattering, although it never ceases to denounce it. Unlike the Romantics and Neo-Romantics, a Cervantes, a Flaubert, and a Stendhal reveal the truth of desire in their great novels, but this truth remains hidden even at the heart of its revelation. The reader, who is usually convinced of his own spontaneity, applies to the work the meanings he already applies to the world. The 19th century, which failed completely to understand Cervantes, continually praised the, quote, originality, end of quote, of his hero. The romantic reader, by a marvelous misinterpretation which fundamentally is only a superior truth, identifies himself with Don Quixote, the supreme imitator, and makes of him the model individual. Let me reread that last sentence. The romantic reader, by a marvelous misinterpretation which fundamentally is only a superior truth, identifies himself with Don Quixote, the supreme imitator, and makes of him the model individual. Thus, it should not surprise us that the term Romanesque, in the French original constant association and opposition of romantique and Romanesque, with their same radical and different endings, tried to convey something of an essential yet elusive difference between the works which passively reflect and those which actively reveal, quote, mediated, end of quote, desire. The two words are not interchangeable, to be sure, but their opposition alone is fully significant. The essay must not be read as the indictment of a narrowly or even broadly defined literary school. Neither is it an effort to circumscribe the genre of the novel. The author is aware that Jean Saint-Toul is a novel and should be classified as such, if classifications were the order of the day. Jean Saint-Toul can nevertheless be viewed as, quote, romantic, end of quote, within the context of the essay. In other words, by contrast with the, quote, Romanesque, end of quote, novelistic, remembrance of things past. Similarly, Chateaubriand's Memoirs d'Outre-Tombe are not a novel, but they partake somewhat of the Romanesque by contrast with the romantic René. Unlike the categories of literary historians which are mechanistic and positivistic, the present categories, even though they are not Hegelian, are still dialectical. They are not independent labels stuck once and for all on a fixed amount of static and objective literary material. Neither are they literature-proof receptacles in which that same material would be contained. They have no value in themselves. No single category can be appraised separately. Oppositions are essential. Their terms should not be dissociated. The whole system alone is truly significant and self-sufficient, in accordance with a structural hypothesis. Thus, it should not surprise us that the term Romanesque still reflects, in its ambiguity, our unawareness of all mediation. The term denotes the chivalric romances, and it denotes Don Quixote. It can be synonymous with romantic, and it can indicate the destruction of romantic pretensions. In the future, we shall use the term romantic for the works which reflect the presence of a mediator without ever revealing it, and the term novelistic for the works which reveal this presence. It is to the latter that this book is primarily devoted. Let me reread that. In the future, we shall use the term romantic for the works which reflect the presence of a mediator without ever revealing it, and the term novelistic for the works which reveal this presence. It is to the latter that this book is primarily devoted. The mediator's prestige is imparted to the object of desire and confers upon it an illusory value. Triangular desire is the desire which transfigures its object. Romantic literature does not disregard this metamorphosis. On the contrary, it turns it to account and boasts of it, but never reveals its actual mechanism. The illusion is a living being whose conception demands a male and a female element. The poet's imagination is the female which remains sterile as long as it is not fertilized by the mediator. The novelist alone describes this actual genesis of the illusion for which Romanticism always makes the poet alone responsible. The Romantic insists on a, quote, parthenogenesis, end of quote, of the imagination. Forever in love with autonomy, he refuses to bow before his own gods. The series of solipsistic theories of poetry produced during the past century and a half are an expression of this refusal. The Romantics congratulate Don Quixote on mistaking an ordinary barber's basin for Mambrino's helmet, while they themselves secretly feel they refrain from such folly. They are mistaken. The Parisian world of, quote, envy, end of quote, jealousy, end of quote, and, quote, impotent hatred, end of quote, is no less illusory and no less desired than the helmet of Mambrino. All of its desires are based on abstractions. Stendhal tells us they are, quote, cerebral desires, end of quote. Joys, and especially suffering, are not rooted in things. They are spiritual, but in an inferior sense which must be explained. From the mediator, a veritable artificial sun, descends a mysterious ray which makes the object shine with a false brilliance. God, that's good. Yeah. Let's read those two past sentences. Joys, and especially suffering, are not rooted in things, semicolon. They are, quote, spiritual, end of quote, but in an inferior sense which must be explained. From the mediator, a veritable artificial sun, descends a mysterious ray which makes the object shine with a false brilliance. Fantastic. The mediator, a veritable artificial sun. We continue. There would be no illusion if Don Quixote were not imitating Amadis. Emma Bovary would not have taken Rudolph for a Prince Charming had she not been imitating romantic heroines. All of Stendhal's art is aimed at persuading us that the values of vanity, nobility, money, power, reputation only seem to be concrete. Period, period, period. I'm going to reread that whole paragraph. The Romantics congratulate Don Quixote on mistaking an ordinary barber's basin for Mambrino's helmet, while they themselves secretly feel they refrain from such folly. They are mistaken. The Parisian world of, quote, envy, end of quote, quote, jealousy, end of quote, and, quote, impotent hatred, end of quote, is no less illusory and no less desired than the helmet of Mambrino. All of its desires are based on abstractions. Stendhal tells us they are, quote, cerebral desires, end of quote. Joys and especially suffering are not rooted in things. They are, quote, spiritual, end of quote, but in an inferior sense which must be explained. From the mediator, a veritable artificial sun, descends a mysterious ray which makes the object shine with a false brilliance. There would be no illusion if Don Quixote were not imitating Amadis. Emma Bovary would not have taken Rudolph for a Prince Charming had she not been imitating romantic heroines. All of Stendhal's art is aimed at persuading us that the values of vanity, nobility, money, power, reputation only seem to be concrete, period. It is this abstract character which allows the comparison of the desire stemming from vanity with Don Quixote's desire. Let me repeat that because I didn't get that sentence at all. It is this abstract character which allows the comparison of the desire stemming from vanity with Don Quixote's desire. The illusion is not the same, but there is still an illusion. Desire projects a dream universe around the hero. In both cases, the hero escapes from his fantasies only on his deathbed. If Julian seems more lucid than Don Quixote, it is because the people who surround him, with the exception of Mademoiselle de Renal, are even more bewitched than he. The metamorphosis of the desired object occurred to Stendhal long before his novelistic period. In De l'Amour, he gives a famous description of it based on the image of crystallization. The later novelistic developments appear faithful to the ideology of 1822. They diverge from it, however, on one essential point. According to the preceding analyses, crystallization should be the result of vanity. But it is not under the heading of vanity that Stendhal presents this phenomenon to us in De l'Amour. It is under the heading of, quote, passion, end of quote. Passion, in Stendhal, is the opposite of vanity. Fabrice Del Dongo is the perfect example of the passionate person. He is distinguished by his emotional autonomy, by the spontaneity of his desires, by his absolute indifference to the opinion of others. The passionate person draws the strength of his desire from within himself and not from others. Can it be that we are mistaken? Could it be authentic passion in the novels which is accompanied by crystallization? All Stendhal's great pairs of lovers contradict this point of view. True love, such as that of Fabrice for Celia, and that which Julian finally knows with Madame de Renal does not transfigure. The qualities which this love discovers in its object, the happiness it expects from it, are not illusory. Love, passion, is always accompanied by esteem, in Corneille's sense of the word. It is based on a perfect agreement among reason, will, and sensibility. The real Madame de Renal is the one desired by Julian. The real Mathilde is the one he does not desire. In the first case, it is a question of passion. In the second, of vanity. It is indeed, therefore, vanity which transforms its object. Wow, damn, this is a crazy bastard, huh? There is a radical difference between the essay of 1822 and the novelistic masterpieces, which is not always easy to perceive because in both cases a distinction is made between passion and vanity. Let me reread that. There is a radical difference between the essay of 1822 and the novelistic masterpieces, which is not always easy to perceive because in both cases a distinction is made between passion and vanity. In De l'Amour, Stendhal describes for us the subjective effects of triangular desire, but he attributes them to spontaneous desire. The real criterion of spontaneous desire is the intensity of that desire. The strongest desires are the passionate desires. The desires of vanity are tarnished reflections of authentic desires. Thus, it is always others' desires which derive from vanity, for we are all under the impression that we desire more intensely than others. The distinction between passion and vanity serves to vindicate Stendhal and his reader of the charge of vanity. The mediator remains hidden precisely where his revelation is of the utmost significance in the existence of the author himself. And so the point of view of 1822 must be characterized as romantic. The passion-vanity dialectic remains, quote, individualistic, end of quote. It reminds one a little of Guide's dialectic of the natural self and the social self in The Immoralist.